Hey y'all, it's an honor to share with you this morning, this evening, or afternoon, depending when you're watching this message. If you've been following along with us as a church, we've been doing a series on the power in stories. And we've had Naomi and Pastor Chris share with us, and it's been great having their insight. And I kicked off our series, and I'm excited I get the privilege to kind of do our last Sunday on this topic, looking at the power in stories. And in the final message today, I really want to look at how the power in stories gives us a different perspective if we're willing to get involved in the stories of others. Far too often, we don't get involved in the stories of others. And I believe that distorts our perspective on different issues. And I think this kind of feeds in us and them mentality that further separates us and causes more pain. And I believe through the ministry of Jesus, Jesus leads by example in getting involved in the stories of others. That is why today I want to look at a passage in Scripture found in Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 to 13. Where Jesus calls a surprising individual to follow him that was hated by the entire Jewish community. And the reason he was hated was because this person was a tax collector. Right? Doesn't that give you a tax collector? Can you believe it? Jesus calls a tax collector to follow him. Now, if you don't know what a tax collector is, or why a whole Jewish community might, hate these individuals, let me just give you a little bit of information about them. So they were hated, and often at times they would even be cut off by their own family. And the whole reason for this is because they collected taxes for the Roman Empire that kept the Jewish community under an oppressive tax system. These tax collectors were also notoriously known for overcharging so they could line their own pockets. And it's really fascinating. If you look at some of Jewish history, you'll find out that they hated tax collectors so much that they did not even believe that tax collectors were redeemable under the law of Moses. They even took it a step further that in court, their testimonies would be rejected. I just want to take a step back for a second and just imagine being so hated that even your own state's religion can't save you. And not only that if you went to court and you gave a testimony, people would reject it because of who you were. Romans normally had personal guards for these tax collectors that would sit with them at their booth too, because they were so hated and despised by the Jewish community. In our story today, we're going to see how Jesus calls one of these tax collectors who will follow him. And a lot of scholars believe this individual's behind a lot of dinner feasts that we read about throughout the gospel, where Jesus is eating with sinners and tax collectors. And I really believe if we take a step back just to see the significance of this moment before we read the story, we kind of see that Jesus is putting his whole ministry under suspicion. Not just with the Jewish community anymore, but with the Roman Empire as well. Because he's taken one of their tax collectors. He's taken someone who helps build their empire stronger, that helps keep the people under them oppressed. And the reason I believe he calls this person is because there is power in stories. And it gives a different perspective to us. And this different perspective is oftentimes contagious to those around us. And I just want to look at this story in Matthew. So without me waffling on anymore. If you're at home, wherever you're watching this, if you have the Bible app, whatever you have, open up your Bibles if you want to Matthew chapter 9, and we're going to start at verse 9. So this is what it says. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Let's just stop there for a second, because I think sometimes we read that and we just brush by. We're like, oh, that's cool. You called Matthew. Way to go, Jesus. But if we take a step back, I think it opens up our eyes a bit. Jesus sees a man, not just any man, a tax collector, who helps oppress his own people. And that leads to this whole community despising him. And in the story today, we don't read of Matthew doing anything. He is just sitting at work at his booth, like he normally does, taking people's money. He probably got his Roman guard there, protecting them. And Jesus walks by. And Jesus says, "Follow me." And do you ever sit back and ask why? I mean, honestly, if I was one of Jesus' followers at the time, I don't know how I would have handled this. I think I would have been like, really? These tax collectors help oppress our entire community. So much so that families lose their homes. Business owners lose their business. And crime is growing rampant in our communities because of poverty. And these individuals, these tax collectors, were helping the systemic oppression by the Roman Empire. They were helping it grow and prosper. So I think if I was there in that context, it would have been tough for me as a follower of Jesus to really just sit there and see this happen. To see Jesus just walking by a booth and go, "Follow me." Matthew doesn't do anything. Matthew doesn't say, "Oh, I'm so wrong, I should have never took taxes." There's none of that in this story. Jesus simply walks by and says, "Follow me." Let's keep reading, because that was only one verse. So let's go to let's read verses 10 and 11. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And I want to stop here again for a second, because I just want us to try to imagine again that you're one of these followers of Jesus. You're one of these early followers. How would you feel in this moment? After seeing everything that happens, like we don't know about the conversation after Jesus goes, "Follow me," but obviously Matthew must have followed him, and they decided to go back to Matthew's place for dinner. We don't know what they talked about on the road. We don't know anything. We just know this much. They end up at Matthew's house for dinner. And it must have been a pretty fun dinner, because the Pharisees even notice that there's a dinner party going on. And it tells us that the Pharisees go and see what's going on. And they see where Jesus is and who he's eating with. And they kind of ask his disciples, "Hey, why did your teacher eat with these tax collectors and sinners?" How would you respond to that if you were one of the people following Jesus? I mean, you would have given up so much to follow him. You would have left your home, your loved ones, to follow this Jesus, who was supposed to cleanse the sin and lead a revolution that would free God's people from oppression. And now he's sitting at a dinner party with the people that helped this oppression grow stronger. And I don't know, honestly, how I would have responded to that. And I kind of feel like how it says in our stories, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples. I feel like the disciples must have, had some kind of body language that didn't look happy, right? They must have been sitting there kind of like that, like arms crossed. You know how little kids do when they're angry, but they're not going to tell you they're angry. They're just going to look like it. I feel like it would have been something like that. Like they're sitting there a bit grumpy. And the Pharisees notice and they're like, hey, why is Jesus eating with those sinners? Let's just read how they respond in this moment. When so many cultural barriers and boundaries and so many things are probably crashing in. And they're trying to still figure out what this Jesus movement is, what it means for them, and all these different things. Let's see how they respond to this question. And this is what it tells us in verses 12 and 13. On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Wait a minute, did you just see how the disciples didn't respond? I mean, have you ever thought about why? I mean, who knows? Maybe Jesus was right by there, and like as soon as the question was asked, Jesus jumps in. He's like, I got this one. She's ready to go. And the disciples don't even get a chance. But I feel there would have been that awkward silence. And I think you know what I mean. We've all been at those moments, or dinner parties, or hanging out with friends where someone asks a question or says something and everyone just gets quiet. You could hear a pin drop. No one knows what to do. And it's kind of like, oh, babe, what do we do now? I feel like it was one of those. I feel like the disciples would have been like, trying to think of an answer, but just having nothing. And just silence. Just that awkward silence. And I kind of even feel like maybe Matthew would have been close by, because it's at Matthew's house. So I think it's safe to assume Matthew, being a tax collector, probably not having many dinner parties where people hang out with him. He's probably trying to be a good host, right? He's rushing around, he's getting the food, he's getting this, he's getting that. I feel like he would have heard this question too. And maybe he's leaning in as well. And he's seeing this awkward silence take place. And I mean, let's be honest, he would have been interested. Because probably 2 days ago, these disciples could have walked past the road where Matthew was, and he could have been lying down close to death, beaten and battered, and they would have kept walking. So I feel like it's that awkward silence where everyone's kind of trying to lean in to see what's happening next. And I believe Jesus knew about this conflict going on. The war that was going on in the disciples' mind, in Matthew's mind, trying to figure out this whole thing. And he continues to lead them on a journey, helping them realize the power in stories, and how when we engage in the stories of others, it changes our perspective and has a contagious effect on those close to us. I mean, in that moment, we have Jesus responding, who knows, maybe Jesus did jump in. But I feel like there would have been that awkward silence. And you kind of have the disciples left speechless. They had nothing to say in that moment. But later we find out that Matthew, this tax collector, is one of the loved members of the 12 disciples. And the person we credit the Gospel of Matthew to. He's the author behind that. And like this trusted gospel circulated in the early churches. And Matthew sat at the table where key decisions were decided in this early Jesus movement. No one was concerned that he was once a tax collector and helped oppress his own people by oppressive tax systems. Which leads me to ask, what changed? Matthew was still once a tax collector and helped an oppressive system that took families home, businesses from business owners, and led to a rise in crime because of the destruction that's caused from poverty. That was still on his track record. I believe what changed is Jesus engaged with Matthew's story. And it changed their perspective, which was contagious and had a dramatic impact on the life of Matthew and all of Jesus' followers. The followers of Jesus were no longer able to judge a book by its cover, but instead they had to engage with the pages found within, which led to them discovering the power in stories. Are we willing to do the same in a society that is becoming increasingly polarized and divided? Can we follow Christ's example and engage in the stories of others, leading to a change in our perspective that is contagious to those around us? You might be sitting where you're at this morning or afternoon, or whenever you're watching this. You might be sitting there and be like, yeah, I'm keen for that, but what does that look like? How do I do that? And I really believe it could be as simple as developing friendships with people you don't normally hang out with and listening to their stories, getting involved in their stories. Or maybe listening to, podcasts or books you don't fully agree with, expanding your own understanding around so many topics that go on in our society. And I want to be clear, this doesn't mean you agree with everything else you hear or you read, but you engage with the stories of others instead of judging a book by its cover. I want to say that again. This doesn't mean you agree with everything else you hear or read, but you engage with the stories of others instead of judging a book by its cover. That's needed in our world. Our world is growing more and more divided and polarized, with people judging others before they even know their own story. We, as followers of Christ, need to lead the way by engaging in the stories of others, because there is power in stories. Jesus showed us that in his life on earth, and he calls us to follow him. So before I close in prayer this morning, I just want to end this message with one question. Are we willing to follow him? Let's close in prayer. God, I really thank you for who you are. I thank you for your heart for us and your heart for all of creation. I pray that you help us as a church, as individuals, engage with the stories of others. I pray that you help us get involved in other people's stories, not just judging books by their cover, but engaging with the pages within. I thank you for your love for each one of us, and I pray that you help us grow and learn more about the power in stories. In your amazing, matchless name, amen. Thank you all so much, and may God's grace and peace be with you.